candid conversations, unfiltered opinions, and humor with Abeg's podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our episode today. I have the pleasure of having this conversation with Janice Brathwaite. Janice and I met a few weeks back. This was supposed to be done a long time ago, but things got in the way. Things happened all on my side. But I'm glad we're sitting down to have this conversation today. So Janice is the founder and CEO of Workplace Transformations. So let's talk about the workplace and why it was necessary for this company to exist. Many CEOs may be listening and like workplace transformation, my workplace is just fine. But is it though? Is it healthy? Does it serve the need of all your employees, or at least have the intention of doing so? So we're going to have that conversation today. Hi, Janice. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for being here. Very grateful to have you. So workplace transformations. Why? Why are we transforming the workplace? Why is that important? Is a workplace?
Well, I've been out in the workforce for quite a long time.
Right.
And one of the questions I asked myself was, why haven't things gotten better for employees? Because it seems like it ebbs and flows. It's a good point, and then it goes downhill, and then it comes back uphill. So what's going on that's causing that ebb and flow? Why isn't it somewhat consistent and positive? So I started doing a lot of work. I said, well, what could cause this? And then as I started to dig deeper, I realized it was the organizational culture of that organization. And I always say that organizational culture is the foundation of any organization. Just like a foundation of a building, there are bricks in the foundation. If those bricks start to crack, the building becomes very unstable. And those cracks are the culture issues that organizations are currently not facing. I won't say they're facing it because they're not facing it. Yeah. So my whole thing is to come in and kind of analyze, work with organizations to make sure that they address those culture cracks, so to speak, and find ways, and I provide them with certain documents, a playbook, how to actually address these issues going forward. And so that's how it started with me doing a lot of research and answer that question. Why haven't things gotten better?
Right. We can't delve in deep completely, but we can scratch the surface because I've seen this a lot, especially in healthcare. Okay. Yeah. Healthcare has one of the most toxic work cultures I've experienced. Most of my experience has been in healthcare. However, we go through, like you said, there's phases of, okay, enough people have complained. Let's try to do something. But it's always the implementation, the ideation to want to do better is there. Bringing in consultants, talking to people. However, facing the truth that may have already been known about addressing certain managers, leaders who have perpetuated a toxic work environment or a toxic work culture. That's usually where the hesitance comes in. So why do you think that is in your experience?
I mean, you're spot on. I worked in healthcare for 17 years, so I'm pretty familiar with some of the issues that healthcare organizations have. I happen to work in community health, which was community health centers, but it doesn't matter. It's healthcare. Healthcare is healthcare. I think that a lot of times that there is not consistency in the way that healthcare organizations do business. You know, they kind of veer off every once in a while to do something different that doesn't really work. It's like they're walking around the dock trying to find out what's going to work. In the process of doing that, they really hurt their employee base because they don't feel that there's any stability. The other thing is that, as odd as it might seem, in healthcare, there's no psychological safety. If a nurse decides to question a provider, a doctor, that's not considered a good thing. Or to say, have you ever thought about this? That's not a good thing. I know what I'm doing. You just be quiet, stand here, and we'll be fine. So I think that there's a lot of that. They're not utilizing their workforce. I mean, I've still got friends in healthcare, and they tell me horror stories about what they're going through. Then they have a manager they never meet with. They don't talk to them. They don't know what's going on. The only way they know what's going on is through the grapevine from other employees because there's no communication. Actually, I just wrote a newsletter. I haven't published it yet. And it's about the Wizard of Oz. So I said, what can I equate this strange thing that's happening with leaders? So I said, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. They're behind the curtain, which means they're in their office and they stay in their office. They kind of talk about the wizard, but they don't really know the wizard. So they make it up. Like the wizard's tall, he's big, he's all those things that you saw in the Wizard of Oz. So I said, that's what's happening. And until leaders get out and come out into the workplace and start talking to their employees, not only talking to them about work, but about who they are, what their needs are. And occasionally you will talk about work. And I know I've experience with this particular thing. It's called management by walking around. And I was in banking and I had a staff of about 70 people and they were in a very highly secured area of the bank. So it was very oppressive. They were under camera all the time. They were, in locked rooms. They weren't locked in, but they had to lock their rooms. So I said to myself, I don't really know these people. I don't know what their challenges are. I can guess, but I'm not sure if I do. So I started doing that. I started going around in the department and just chatting with people, just to try to find out what kinds of things that they're struggling with. And sometimes work would come up, but sometimes it would just be about their life. So I got to know people, or got to know them better. And they got to know me. That's the other thing. Trust is built on knowing somebody. You see somebody on the street, you don't say, I trust you. I trust you. No, you got to get to know the person to have trust and see how they move. So that's what I see. Leaders have become isolated. And I know there's reasons for this.
Yeah.
They're overworked. They don't delegate well. They have too many decisions to make. They get too many meetings. Well, don't even talk about meetings. Too many meetings. So they don't have time for this. Maybe once a month they have a staff meeting and everybody comes together, but that's not really getting to know anyone. That's just delivering information to the staff. So, so in the newsletter, I give some suggestions on how leaders can implement this process. And in the beginning, it's going to seem really strange, but over time, you'll find you learn a lot of the things that you never knew.
I see a lot of companies, again, speaking from a healthcare perspective, implement a pseudo version of what you just talked about, getting to know your employees. However, it's usually, hey, we're having a quick in-service or rounding or whatever. And it's kind of like a drop in a bucket.
Yeah.
Where leaders come, we stand in a huddle. We're having a quick huddle. We stand in a huddle. We give updates. And then it's like, hi, how are you? Great, good job. Right? Yeah. And that is considered that. And in coupling that kind of huddle with stay in your place mentality, that really is something that happens in our healthcare system, where we do the advertising in the hiring process, where we want you to be open. We want you to bring things up. However, when you're that person that identify issues and rightfully bring it up for meaningful change, you're labeled the troublemaker. So how do we not pretend with a pseudo get to know employees with huddles to really walking around and getting to know employees and introducing yourselves and being present and also listening to concerns without terming people troublemakers? Because very easily, once you're tagged a troublemaker, it's very easy for you to lose your job in a matter of months.
And I think that's a very good point about not being labeled a troublemaker. Right. It depends on the intent in which the leader goes in. If that leader is going in just to dig for dirt, they'll find you. If they're really going in to learn something about you, then that's what's going to happen. Yeah. As a leader, you have to change. I'll give you an example. So when I was in banking, I was doing management by walking around, and I did it a few times, and I went to, was talking to one person during one of these walking around sessions, and she didn't seem quite okay. Something was up. I couldn't figure out what it was. And I'm like, that's interesting. So we built a relationship. And she said to me, I don't know if I can tell you this or not. That's totally up to you. If you feel comfortable telling me something, I'm more than happy to listen. So she told me that she had a drug addiction problem. She'd been struggling with it. And that's what I saw. That's what it kind of out of sync kind of thing, but you couldn't put your finger on it. And she said, I don't know what to do. And I said, well, let's work on this together. I have some resources that I know of that maybe can help you out. Thank you so much for telling me.
Yeah.
Rather than suffering in silence and waiting for something to happen. One day you come in and you're not yourself and something happens and then you get fired. And that's the thing. I mean, the other thing was I'm doing management by walking around. I found someone who was stealing money. It's good. The person was covering it really well, but you have to be open to hearing things.
Right.
You're going to, you may not like, you may not agree with, but you've got to go with the idea that everybody has a right to their opinion about things. And you've got to be open to listening to what they say. There may be times when you can do absolutely nothing about it. You've got to be honest. When we had a big backlog when I was in banking and cash and getting it out of the vault, I was giving people an opportunity to kind of run the department the way work was done. And we had a really big backlog and they were having these like 15-minute meetings, like those huddles you're talking about, wanting to kind of strategize how they were going to set up the day. So I would just sit in my office and they would have these meetings. And one day my boss came to me and said, Janice, I think you're going to have to stop those meetings. I said, why? Well, we got a big backlog and we need to really focus on that. I said, well, kind of that's what we're doing. By having these meetings, we're focusing on doing the best production that we can do or producing the best we can. So we went back and forth a few times, but then when it comes down to it, the boss is the boss. So now I'm saying to myself, how do I explain this to the people that I'm now going to take away the empowerment that I gave them? So I was straightforward with them. I said, we're in a bind. We've got too much cash in the vault. We've got to get it out. Temporarily, we're going to have to stop the morning meetings. Nobody said anything. So I said, okay. So one morning I came in and I tell this story quite often because it kind of speaks to what we're talking about. I was in my office and it was a glassed-in office. And it was like, they started at 8:00 and it was like 10 past 8. And nobody was around. Nobody was in their rooms. Nobody was walking around. It's like, I saw people come in. I know they're here, but where are they? So I got up and I walked out of my office and down the end of the hall, they were meeting. Because once you empower people, you can't take it back. They saw the value in it. And I'll tell you, that was one of the highest points in my career. But they saw the value in it. And we're not going to let anything stop them from doing the best job that they could. And the way they felt they could do that is if they played to the strengths of the people who counted the cash, in for one deposits. It was amazing. It was absolutely amazing.
What did you do?
I didn't do anything. I just went back in my office and sat down. I was like, I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying anything. And then a little while later, here they come, strolling down down the hallway. I'm like, they're getting ready. So anyhow, but that's the thing. I think that's a fear that a lot of people have and leaders have is if I empower these people, what happens? They're going to be running the show? Because somebody asked me that when I set up these it was self-directed teams. When I set up these self-directed teams, said to me, when I told them how it was structured, they said, well, you're the boss. You're supposed to be telling us what to do. I said, I know this job from a high level. You know it on the ground level. You know better than I what needs to get done and how it needs to get done. So now you have the opportunity to have input into that. And it worked. I didn't think it was going to work, but it absolutely worked.
So I think it goes back to self-esteem. Why do some leaders have a dead grip on their titles to the point of fearing empowering people? Because I believe a good leader, you were once somewhere that was not this high position. You grew into this position. So why is it threatening for somebody else to grow into a position? Why do you have such a dead grip on it? Why do you think some leaders have that mindset as opposed to empowering people to be their best and to hone their potential?
Right.
They fear losing their positioning.
Like you're saying, and low self-esteem, but also insecurity. I think leaders think they need to have the answers to everything, every question. No one ever says, listen, I don't know about that, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to figure it out and I'll get back to you. No, they have to have the answer. So they come into it with this, and I won't call it exactly imposter syndrome, but it's very similar to that I'm in charge and I have to know everything about everything and make every final decision. And what that says to the staff is you don't really value our input. So what happens when people don't get their input isn't valued? They stop giving it. And you miss out as a leader on a lot of things that could help you. I mean, why hire people if you're not going to have them have the ability to have input? Why hire people? If you have all the answers, you don't really need these people. You know what to do as a leader. And I think that's it. I think they get very insecure about the fact that they don't know everything. And when they get that way, then they have a tendency to, kind of like be bombastic and push themselves through because they want people to think they know, but they really don't.
So where does that come from? At what point in this person's journey did this happen? I'll speak for myself. I don't want to speak for everybody. As a Black woman in America, especially in the corporate America scene, whether it's in healthcare or in any leadership role, executive boardroom, you name it, we have this thing of educating ourselves and making sure that we present more than what is expected of us. And even with that, we're often the ones growing others, right? But more often than not, we don't receive the same level of support, maybe from others. So I'm curious, at what level can a person experience trauma? When it comes to trauma in the workplace, I know, I know that firsthand, but it hasn't clouded my need to grow other people. So what would you think contributes to a mindset that leads to that level of insecurity?
That's a good question. The insecurity is probably more in their mind than it is anywhere else. They feel insecure about themselves. And it might be that maybe they got promoted quickly and deep down inside, they're saying, do I really belong here? Do I really have the skills for this? And so they're going to try to push it out that they do when they may not have some skills. That's okay. That's why you have coaches, the executive coaches, to walk you through certain things and to get you to understand that this is a better way to do it. But yeah, I think it's mostly about that they can't seem to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. And somebody asked me today, are toxic leaders born or made?
A little bit of both.
I said, well, in my estimation, they're made. And this is how they're made. So when I'm a young employee, new into the organization, and I see this one person who, even though you might not put it in words, you see their toxic behaviors. And the next thing you know, they get promoted. So you say, well, in order to get promoted, I have to be just like them. And that perpetuates that toxicity all the way up the ladder to the top. So I think it's more about seeing the environment and replicating that environment and becoming like that person. And so that's why you see it like in different levels within organizations, because people have been seeing how it's been done.
Especially in healthcare, we are notorious for that. And the reason I said a little bit of both is that people often turn to their intrinsic voices to direct them too. So it's one thing for me to be in a toxic environment and see toxicity and seeing others kind of like align with that and get favor. And for me to think, do I have to be that way? And I cannot live with myself being that way. So if that is what it takes to get there, I'd rather be here or just leave. Right. And that is something that makes the workplace a little heavy. And it goes back to that phrase, people that mind don't matter and people that matter don't mind. And even in nursing education, there's a lot of that. I've experienced and also gotten feedback of professors siding with other students to bully students. Like, what example are you setting? At the same time, you're telling your students, if you're bullied by a nurse or a doctor or whatever on the floor, let me know. So what message are you sending? Right. So I think it's very important for us to tap inwards because, just like you said, it's very easy to align with certain behavior pattern because you see that is what is succeeding in the workplace. But how does that sit within you? How do you feel about yourself at the end of the day? You know, you can get that promotion, but at what cost?
Right. And you're going against your values.
Absolutely.
For gain, basically, to gain a higher position. Well, I made a decision a long time ago. When I came into the workplace, I didn't really have an idea of how you moved up or anything. And as I started to see this, I said, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that that person would get promoted. And I think at some one point in time, I started taking on some of those ways. And then I stopped myself and I said, this doesn't even feel good. It feels really awful.
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? Why am I not just being who I am? And from that point on, what you see is what you get. I'm not going to try to be false. I'm not going to try to blow smoke. I'm not going to do any of that. I'm going to be honest and straightforward, but I also want to be supportive and somebody you can come to and talk to. I mean, I've had employees tell me all kinds of things. And people that didn't even work for me. Last place I worked, people would come in and there was a chair in the corner. They would come in and said, sit down. And they say, oh, you're not going to guess what's. And then they just talk to me, and I'd listen and, if they needed advice, I'd give them advice. It was, and I think that's what happens when you become authentic. That's the word. Authentically who you are. People trust you because they know exactly what they're going to get.
And that's it, that authenticity, and you cannot fake it, and people can always gravitate. You mentioned the employee who came to you about having that addiction. That was such a brief thing. It's not easy to admit to having an addiction, and it's not easy to identify somebody. And you have to think back. This employee probably has family, extended family members. They have friends, and they have people outside that maybe could have supported them Obeya Foundation, but they didn't feel comfortable enough to go to those people, maybe because of fear of judgment or not just having, that support, but they came to you. So addiction is something that is a disease. Unfortunately, as a society, some people still don't look at it as a disease. They feel it's a choice that people make and you can easily walk away from. Now, if you see me with a broken arm, you have pity on me. It's a broken aspect of a person that they feel that they can fix with whatever substances. So I know this was not about addiction, but please, if you have somebody that has any addiction, we often think of drugs, alcohol, but other addiction, gambling, pornography, whatever it is, right? Be that sounding board. Listen, if you don't have experience, help them find resources that they can use to help themselves. Because at a point when somebody's coming to you and saying something, they're tired. They're tired. They're looking for a way out. There's a loud cry for help. So Janice, so thank you so much for having to be that safe place for that person, because I'm sure it took a lot for them to come to you.
I'm sure it did. And they thought about it long and hard before they.
Absolutely.
But, I was glad that they did. And I was glad that I was able to help to some extent with getting them services and so forth. So, the thing is about empowering staff. This is another example. So a place that I worked a while back, they decided they're going to renovate the floor. They came in, they did a big thing in the staff meeting and telling everybody, you're going to help us do this and you're going to have some say about how it's done. And everyone was kind of excited, like, okay, we can kind of, help structure our environment. What happened was the only thing they had any input into was the color of the rug. Other than that, nothing. It took a while. And after the place was all done, and said to me, I don't understand. We've just renovated this place. We're trying to make it nice for them. And they did nothing but complaints. And I said, well, there's a reason for that. I said, they felt misled. You could have put gold in here and it wouldn't have mattered because they felt misled. They felt that they were going to have some power and then you just snatched it back. You can't really blame them for being a little bit upset because they lost trust in you. They lost trust, So I'm just going to say everything's bad in you. God, did they do that? Why did you do that? Oh, that color is terrible. It was everything. Everything was bad. So that's what happens when you tell people you're going to empower them and then you don't.
It goes for everything. The same open door policy that is really a trap. People lose faith. They lose trust. And, you have, things suffering. Okay, why is it that people are not, taking initiative? People are not doing this. People are not doing that. That's because when, they raise a concern or possible have an opinion for process change, you whack them down like a whack-a-mole, right? That could be it. Maybe have you looked at that? And sometimes leadership has a blind spot to their behavior or their processes, right? Or rules or policies that actually affect, the morale of the employee. In that regard, how can leadership of any organization learn to look in the mirror? Like, what part are we playing policy-wise, culture-wise, that may be leading to low morale within the employee units? Sometimes they want to point fingers elsewhere, but
Right.
the other fingers are pointing this way. Are you looking at yourself? Are you looking at what you're doing? So for any leader listening to us today from any organization or even a founder building out their company, how can they assess their behavior, their policies, or their foundation, their cultural foundation that may lead to morale?
When someone's put in a leadership position or promoted to a leadership position, there are they might have been very good at what they did. And that's probably how they got there. But this is a different skill set. Leading an organization, a different skill set. Yes, you've got to hire people who can do the job the way it needs to get done. But you need to be the one kind of setting the course, looking over the organization, seeing what needs to get done, seeing what needs to get changed, not being involved in everything, but you have to be involved in high level things. And I don't think most leaders are. I think that we're promoting people into positions that I'm not saying that they couldn't learn how to do this, but they currently don't have those skills. I had somebody tell me that a while back that somebody had been at a meeting and one of the leaders just called somebody out right in the middle of the meeting. Just said something terrible. And everybody was like, oh, God. But they thought, well, if he did that to them, he can do it to me. So now they're not going to give any bad feedback. They're going to give any feedback. Like the dog in the window, their head going up and down. Yes. Okay. And yourself, it's not right. And I said, it's like, I was saying it's like, I used to say this joke. And when I was in a company, an organization, when we walk out of a staff meeting, I would turn to someone and say, did you see that hump under the rug? What are you talking about? I said, you didn't see the hump under the rug in the middle of the floor. No, what are you talking about? What hump? Those are all the things we've swept under there and have not addressed. But you know what? At some point in time, someone's going to take a broom and stick it under there and you're going to deal with it. But that's exactly what it's like. They just sweeping it under the rug. Like you've heard it in staff meetings and in meetings. Like they kind of poo-poo it, like push it to the side. Yeah. Or say, well, we'll get back to that. How many times do you hear that? We'll get back to that. We'll never get back to it because I don't want to talk about it. Right. So that's my analogy for the way certain things are done when it comes to taking in ideas from employees.
So don't sweep it under the rug. So about leadership and skills, I'm going to my place of reference, healthcare. Healthcare is majority skill based. However, in leadership, I would say leadership is about 60% soft skills and 40%, your technical skill, your training, your education, all of that stuff. And that is a place that I feel leadership promotion should focus on soft skills. Some people don't know how to talk to other people, address people, correct people, feedback, be direct. What is your opinion on that? Soft skills and authenticity kind of like goes hand in hand. Some people have it innately or, have that intrinsic empathy. And some people have to be taught to get to it or coached into it. So what is your outlook on soft skill and leadership? And in a very technical area, most careers are technical anywhere, engineering, banking, you name it.
Well, I think that soft skills are really the hard skills. And when I first became a low-level leader, and I talk about this sometimes to people, I went to a conference. And when I came back, I left my lead person in charge of the group. Maybe it wasn't a big group. It's probably about 8 people. When I came back, she and I did a debrief on, how things had gone since I was away. And she said, oh, I'm going to tell you, Sally was out of control. She said she was just going out to lunch and coming back late and just causing all kind of havoc. So I said, that's interesting. So I called everybody in a conference room, basically to thank them for, holding down the fort when I was away. So I went around the room and I said to each person, I want to thank you for, pitching in. I said something sort of personal, like nice. When I got to her, I just skipped right over her. I got to the next person and she raised her hand and said, I think you skipped over me. And I said, yeah, we'll talk about it later. And then the next thing I knew, she was crying. When I walked out of that meeting, this is what I said to myself. Janice,
Yeah.
you got to either learn how to do this right or you need to get out. So then I started taking courses and going to different trainings and all the rest of it. Took a while to kind of get the flow of it. It doesn't just happen overnight. Maybe some people are born leaders, but I don't think that people are born leaders. I think they become leaders over time. That's what I did. But you have to humble yourself and say, I don't know what I'm doing. Really don't. And it's a hard thing because you want to put on this facade that you know everything and you have all the answers and all the rest of that. But in actuality, you really don't. That's the thing. Leaders don't get enough support when they become leaders. You can help a leader become a better leader or a great leader, actually, if they're allowed to have support, especially if this is their first leadership position. And I'm not talking about vice president. I'm talking about the high level. And my idea of that is when you're coaching a leader and say one of the things the leader has said is, I'm struggling with communication. So you as a coach sit in on a meeting and you listen to how the meeting flows and what the person says. And at the end of it, you debrief with them and say, I noticed when you said this, they seem to be a little bit concerned. What was your feeling? What was going on there? So that they start thinking like, oh, I gotta watch what I say and how I say it because I think it's fine, but other people don't. So you can become a great leader, I believe. It just takes time, work, and someone telling you you need to have a coach. You need to go through this period of time with a coach. And I'm not saying a coach for 4 weeks. I'm talking about a coach for a year. The first year is always the hardest. Right. So that's how I would approach it. I mean, I want to find out what are they struggling with. Most of the time we know what we're not good at.
Yeah.
We just don't like talking about it.
Do you think it's possible to coach a leader who went up the ladder, with rather toxic practices, who now is seeking coaching to be more of a transformative kind of leader? How long is that process? Because we're not talking a week or 4 weeks. Usually
Right.
coaching, effective coaching, a year or more. Do you think it's possible for somebody to unlearn a lot of their bad habits that maybe have spanned a 10 to 20 year career?
If they really want to.
Okay.
It's always about, are they feeling that they're not as effective as they could be? Something's causing them to have this feeling of something's not quite right, that kind of feeling. And so most of the time when, you do not an assessment, but you get people to talk about the things of their strengths and what they'd like to improve on. And, and it gives you kind of a roadmap as to where you need to go with this particular leader. I think that they are aware of their weaknesses. They just don't want to admit them. And they need somebody to talk to about them because they see it's failing. Things aren't working the way I thought it was going to work. I came in with a heavy hand and I thought this was going to way of doing them. I don't need to tell them everything. I don't need to communicate all the time. All of those things are all wrong. And they just, kind of take on that persona. And you've got to try as a coach to kind of ease them out of that way of thinking.
Okay. So you have to be gentle with said leader because you use the word ease. Okay.
Coming in with you saying, you should do this and you should do that. And that wasn't right.
Right.
That's not going to work. If somebody does that to me, I just shut down.
Yeah, that's it.
I'm done. So you have to ease into it. And you really have to get them to start talking. Really, coaching is about them talking and kind of identifying things and saying, I noticed in the last meeting I was in, everybody kind of looked funny when I was talking about blah, blah, blah. I couldn't figure out why. I felt like I was doing the right thing. So how did you present it? That would be my question. Give me an idea of how you presented it. And then we can kind of critique that and say, okay, well, what in that you think was really good and what do you think you could do better? And relaying that information.
So while on the topic of presentation and leadership, right? So it's not always rosy. The times that your team will take you to the ends of almost to the eclipse of hell, drop you off. As productivity, people very laissez-faire in their way of functioning in their role. And we're all human, and we have our different frustration point. So how can a leader kind of remediate maybe a not so stellar moment with frustration in whether it's in a group setting or an intimate setting with an employee or a group of employees who were not basically operating within what is required of them?
Well, first of all, if this person is having some kind of an issue, it shouldn't be a surprise to them or anyone else, because people know when they're not performing the way they're supposed to perform. But as a leader, believe that the way you talk to people is you're straightforward, but you're not cruel and you're not with no heart. If you say something to somebody, I just want to tell you that I've been looking at all the statistics, all of your workload and all the rest of that. And I think that there's some areas for improvement in this. So let me tell you what those are. And then you tell them what they are. Don't just leave them to their own to kind of figure it out. And then you say, so for the next 60 or 90 days, this is what we're going to work on. And don't just say it, do it. Because I've written about this myself. Performance improvement plans are being used in a very nefarious way today.
Yes.
Get people out of organizations
Yes.
that they don't particularly think of. And then they might not have nothing to do with the performance. They might not like it. So they might not be bored with the program, so to speak. So let's find a way to ease them out. And that is not what a PIP is for, but it's being used like that. And believe me, when COVID happened, I'm going to divert from it. A lot of people left the workforce, and especially in healthcare. They realized that work is just not good for me. And they chose other career paths. And you can't really blame them for that because, as you're saying, these kind of toxic behaviors exist in healthcare. And so if people have a chance to escape, they're going to escape or stay there, which is worse, and just be totally disengaged and take a paycheck. And that's about it. That's all you get. So I think that was a big learning lesson. It should have been for healthcare and a lot of other organizations.
Yes.
That why did this happen? What made it happen? And how do we prevent it from happening in the future? Because there might be another COVID, or there might be another emergency, or there might be something just coming up in business, a merger, for instance. So how do we do this? So kind of doing like a debrief on a better way to deliver this kind of messages, these kinds of messages. I don't think leaders are very good at that. Like if there's going to be a layoff, you hear whispering. Everybody knows something's coming. Not sure what, but they think it's a layoff. And rather than being straightforward and standing up in front of the people in your organization saying, sadly, we're going to have to make some changes. And this is going to impact some of you. And for that, I'm very sorry. But in looking at the way we're trying to move forward, we can't get there and blah, 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 blah. Give them a full picture of why you're doing what you're doing. They're not going to like it. Nobody likes to get laid off. But at least they know, well, it wasn't arbitrary. They didn't just go down a list of names and say, okay, check, Janice, down the list, and put a check beside you and say, those are the people that are going to go.
Oof, we don't have enough time. We really do not have enough time to talk about the nefarious ways PIPs are used and also how layoffs are kind of cherry-picked in some organization. And that is why they cannot be honest. There was a recent layoff that happened in one of the major news media, and a young man created content around it. His outlook of what happened was that only a certain demographic of people were laid off, and people in that department who were of a certain demographic were redistributed into the company. And most often than not, when layoffs happen in certain situations, there's usually that cherry picking. That is why sometimes it comes as a surprise. There's no transparency and leads to further corrosion of trust. And when people decide to function at bare minimum, you wonder why. Or paying you according to the market outlook. right? Even if this person is going above and beyond and doing more than is required of them, and they
Right.
can't get a raise. However, when they decide, okay, I'm going to function within, this, description, then you decide to start a PIP on them. Why? Because when they were performing at peak capacity, there was no reward.
Nobody asked why. What happened?
Nobody asked what happened. So that is such a deep conversation, how something that was meant to be support and kind of a coaching tool for an employee to get them to maybe understanding their roles better or understanding the value of their role to the company. It is now being used, especially by toxic leaders, as a way to push people out the door, because at the end of the day, they understand that once the legality gets involved, that you're going to have to show up in court with evidence to show that this person, several, whatever. And for anybody listening, please keep records, keep email records outside of your company email, just so you know. But unfortunately, these are the kinds of cultural things that sometimes companies do not want to address, or they recognize it. They profess to want to address it. However, they either stop or find a way to hump in the rug. You talked about sweep things under the rug, and then what happens? It just compounds from there. It's sad. As we're rounding off this conversation, Janice, what do you think the cost is to that proverbial sweeping under the rug that some companies do, even though they recognize that they don't have the healthiest workplace culture?
Well, first of all, like you said, it's recognition. And the only ways you recognize things is really to see it, some people in black and white. And that's why I think when you have a culture issue, and usually leaders tell me it's like one thing. The reason why we're struggling, but it's more than one thing. And the more I drill down into the organization, the more I find that there's many things that are causing this. And so leaders, of course, want to get it fixed. Let's get this thing fixed. But I think the best way to do this is to find out what your culture is. I mean, I do a deep assessment of an organization with a lot of employee input. It's not like an engagement survey either. To get as much feedback as I possibly can, because I'm going to make recommendations. I need to know what the problems are, because obviously you don't, or you think you don't want to admit. So that's how I approach it. Okay. I think that until organizations start really trying to fix the foundation, they're going to continue to have low recruitment, low retention, and, not as much productivity as they possibly could have. They can make a decision about like they want to live like that or not. But I want to get back to the PIP before we end.
Yes.
One thing about a PIP, it's called an improvement plan. So what resources are you going to give that person to help them improve? You can't just leave them hanging. You figure out what you're going to do. That sometimes it's important to bring in resources. They don't, like I say, it's a punishment, not an improvement plan. It should be called a PPP.
It should.
But anyhow, so I'll leave you with that.
It should, because that's the way they're using it now. It's so disgustingly sad.
Yes.
It should be called a PPP. Well, I agree. I really agree on that one. I mean, that's an episode on its own. That is a whole episode on its own, because goodness gracious, what are we doing? What are we doing? And this culture of filling a basket, I call it. You have to, at least the stakeholders, because everything is now basically owned by VCs or angel investors. At least the stakeholders they're focused on return on investment. Your investment is affected if a company is continually recruiting and losing folks, because that recruitment effort takes investment. And when somebody's leaving the company, that is also investment leaving the door. So the proverbial habit, I don't even call it a revolving door, because with a revolving door, you can actually control some movement, but it's a basket. You're constantly refilling a basket. Something should help retention, right? What is the behavior that is leading to this basket emptying? Or why are we not using a bucket? Why do we have a basket? Why is the organization a basket? So there's a whole lot that can be discussed on that end, and it takes the behavior of a manager. It takes a behavior of a leader It doesn't matter what your position is. Be that difference. Maybe you're the one person everybody needs to model.
Yes.
If you're following the crowd and being like everybody else, then that it becomes, a culture that everybody has. But if you model something different and people actually see that behavior being effective, you'll start being the reference. Like, why, look at that department that they're doing well. Things of that nature. I think people sometimes are just not comfortable in being bold because nobody wants to stand out like a sore thumb. Especially if you feel like everybody around is behaving a certain way.
As they say, you're not a team player.
Janice, I don't know what it is about me. I enjoy that. I don't have to join the team of toxic. I don't have to. If we have company, vision of doing something, growing positively, I will take that on. However, I will take that on with humanity and empathy and whatever comes with it. There's no reason to have a crab in a bucket mentality. It doesn't work for anybody. No. You succeeded in cutting somebody down today. Yours is right around the corner. You just wait.
Yeah, sure.
That's the one thing that sometimes people don't have the vision of, right? You're fitting into this toxic culture of dismantling people or affecting people in a way that is not healthy. And right now we may be working out for you, but when your turn comes, are you going to complain about it? Right. Are you going to be surprised? You shouldn't be. Don't be.
Culture is. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, we could talk for days. So I want people to find you and work with you. Please, for any organization listening to us, any founder who's starting out their companies or already established businesses of all sizes who are looking to improve the culture within their company, how can they find you and how can they work with you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. They can also find me at my email, jcbrathwaite@worktransformations.com.
Beautiful.
And I'd love to talk to people who are really struggling and trying to figure this thing out.
Great. Thank you for that. So for everybody, if you didn't get it down, don't worry. We'll make it available in the show notes and you can click in and find Janice. So because I'm never satisfied. I'm like Oliver Twist. I always ask for more. So I'm asking, please, before we conclude our conversation, if you can leave a golden nugget or a few golden nuggets for all of our listeners, whether the leaders or their employees within a company, what would you like our listeners to take away from our conversation today?
If you're a leader, don't be a wizard. Come out from behind the curtain. We want to know who you are. We want to know what your values are. And if you can do that with your employees, you're going to find out you're going to have a much more cohesive organization. And when you talk, they have a framework for who you are, like you're delivering a message or whatever. I'm encouraging leaders to revitalize management by walking around.
Don't be a wizard.
Yeah.
I love it. Don't be a wizard. There's no need to be mysterious. Your employees want to know you. It makes for an easier relationship. So thank you, everybody. I benefited from this conversation. And I hope you did too. Thank you, Janice. This was such a lovely conversation.
So much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. I'm grateful for your presence. Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to Abeg's podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. It really helps us out. We'd love to hear your thoughts and continue the discussion. So join us on social media or drop us a message. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and keep pushing the boundaries of your world.